everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
DanMachi, why am I being crowned the Lord of Cinder? Chapter 189 to 196. Chapter 189. So what exactly is this thing meant to hunt? Ash Judge. Of course it judges whether an Ashen One is qualified to link the fire. Clearing Phase 1 flawlessly, and without taking damage was enough to prove his strength to Gunder. As for the second phase, where the pus of Mun infection within the Ash Judge fully erupted, twisting it into a grotesque form since this virus was created by the abyss itself, Ron couldn't guarantee whether it was contagious. If something this twisted were brought outside the fog gate into the world of Aurario, he didn't even dare imagine the consequences. As a sediment of humanity, and with humanity itself being something impossible to fully grasp once infected, there was no cure. If I'd known I'd have to fight the Ash Judge, no matter what, I wouldn't have let Lafia and the others come in. Forget the Black Dragon crisis. If the pus of Mun virus broke out in Aurario, the destruction would be far more absolute. Quickly pulling back to a safe distance, Ron swept his gaze over the girls, who were currently frozen in shock, stunned by the grotesque horror of the virus. His brows furrowed tightly. You need to be careful. This virus is contagious. If it spreads back to Aurario, the consequences will be unimaginable. Leave the fighting to me. With such a precedent right in front of them, staring at the bloated, diseased mass writhing behind the Ash Judge, Lafia felt her trypophobia flare up. The swollen, mutated flesh had grown so grotesquely large, it looked like it might crush the tall figure beneath its own weight. If she were infected, would she end up like that too? The elven girl nodded heavily. Just as she was about to ask whether Ron needed help, she saw what he did next. The cracked stone pendant veined with golden threads was clenched in his palm. No chant was needed. Lafia could clearly feel the surging magical power within Ron's body, gathering into visible red lightning. Incantation. Lanciax's glaive. A blade of magic forged from red lightning materialized in his hand. At such close range, she could clearly feel the violent, tyrannical aura contained within that spell. With a distorted roar from the grotesque creature ahead, the Ash Judge in its second phase, now a mass of writhing flesh, lunged directly toward Ron and Lafia. Its shriveled claws lashed out, attempting to tear the humans apart. Damn it! If he had no restraints, fighting the pus of Mun wouldn't be difficult for Ron at all. But looking at the Ash Judge charging forward, the red lightning blade already fully formed in his palm, there was no need for technique. He swung decisively. The crackling red lightning exploded through the air, and with a flash of blazing crimson light SHHHK. The magic weapon shattered the moment it made contact with the Ash Judge. But the violent energy found its outlet, engulfing the massive flesh beast in a storm of red lightning. Because it had only just formed, the mutated mass of the pus of Mun had little defensive capability. The ancient dragon lightning tore it apart, instantly obliterating the bloated flesh behind the Ash Judge, leaving only its shredded body behind. That easy. The pus of Mun infecting the Ash Judge in Dark Souls 3, it was basically just roadside trash tier. But the grotesque scene had left a deep psychological scar on Ron. He didn't approach recklessly. Instead, he maintained distance and observed. At that moment, Lafia suddenly cried out, "Ron! Look at the Ash Judge, those black tadpoles crawling out of its body. What are those things?" So this is how it spreads. Ron's pupils shrank. Those countless, writhing black tadpoles, as if sensing a host, were crawling toward him. If he had carelessly gone to loot the corpse after killing it, the consequences would have been disastrous. Stay behind me. There was no hesitation. His time in the dungeon had already sharpened his combat instincts to the extreme. He gripped the sacred seal tightly once more. Dragon Fire. A blazing crimson emblem representing dragon communion manifested behind him. As magic surged, the phantom image of an ancient dragon's head took shape. Flames, dragon blood-infused flames erupted from its maw. They spread outward in a wide area, sweeping attack, the intense heat drying the surrounding air, and those writhing black tadpoles were completely incinerated the moment they were touched by the flames. To prevent anything from slipping through, Ron carefully controlled the coverage of the dragon fire, ensuring there was absolutely no chance of infection. Only when the distant fog gate ahead finally came into view did he let out a breath. Should be cleaned up, right? His expression remained serious. His gaze swept over Tiona behind him and the elf girl, who seemed deep in thought. After repeatedly encountering such abnormal events, this Amazoness girl from the country of blood and fighting felt a strange sense of unease when meeting Ron's deep brown eyes. It wasn't because he was stronger than her. If she had to describe it, it was the sheer depth of mystery surrounding him, as if there were secrets that could never be fully uncovered. "Why are you looking at me like that?" She wasn't exactly flustered, but this kind of abstract concept was hard for Tiona to grasp. Why would the Ash Judge mutate so rapidly after infection? And how exactly did this virus spread? Still, she understood Ron's concern about safety. "I'm watching, okay. I'm still a first-class adventurer, there's no way I'd get infected. And Lafia too, is this virus like a plague?" Before coming to Orario, Tiona remembered that her homeland had once suffered a small-scale outbreak. But with healers present, it had been quickly contained. Something like that. In terms of infectivity, the pus of men virus far exceeded any ordinary plague. Ron nodded slightly. But a plague can be treated. This virus once infected, there's no cure. It could very well bring down the entire order of Orario. Just hearing that, the tan-skinned Amazoness felt a chill run down her spine. Imagining adventurers in Orario suddenly mutating at any moment, she understood exactly what kind of disaster that would bring. Good thing we've dealt with it completely. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be able to leave this place. Ron spoke with a hint of relief. This short exploration beyond the fog gate had served as a serious warning. But in terms of gains, it had also been extremely rewarding. His gaze shifted forward to the weapon in the distance. A massive spiral greatsword, its surface covered in dark golden patterns. It wasn't the spiral sword from Dark Souls. No, a different name fit it better. Godslayer's greatsword. So what exactly was this god-slaying greatsword meant to hunt? I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 190, Lafia. Why does it feel like Ron knows a bit too many spells? 1189 words. Godslayer's greatsword. Ron was naturally more than familiar with this thing. It was the drop from defeating the boss Godskin Apostle in Elden Ring, so why would it appear here, obtained from the Ash Judge? If you had to ask, then it was obviously because of that cheap trick aimed straight at the balls. Only after confirming that the pus of man virus had completely disappeared did he finally take the spiral greatsword into his hands. But before he could even properly examine it, Ron could already feel the unique skill inherent to this weapon itself. Queen's Black Flame ignites the Godslayer's black flame along the blade. For a certain duration, the black flame consumes the user's life force. Very familiar. It followed the same principle as the pyromancy, power within, from the Ashen One character save he had mastered. The black flame that slays gods. So this weapon could directly damage the origin of the gods in DanMachi. It could even kill those so-called gods outright inside the dungeon. This was a good weapon. It was just that, at his current stage, Ron couldn't think of any situation where he would need to use it. Orario did indeed still have remnants of Evolus, along with gods living under false identities. If something really happened because of his despicable outsider skill, then this Godslayer's greatsword would be his final trump card. Not a bad haul. It's just a shame I didn't get the smithing stones I promised Lady Hephaestus. Ron lightly shook his head. After defeating the Ash Judge, there was no path ahead leading to any kind of altar. That meant the Firekeeper likely couldn't be found here. Stay any longer. There was no point. The heavy smog blanketing the sky, along with the overlapping distortions caused by time-space dislocation, made the entire place feel deeply unsettling just by standing there. We should head back. Let's see if we can find a way back to the 13th floor. We shouldn't keep them waiting too long. The surrounding air was suffocating. If there had been a way out, Tiona would have already left this collapsing world-like secret realm. As for this bizarre exploration experience, according to Captain Finn, everything unusual had to be recorded and reported afterward. But as the tan-skinned Amazoness girl looked at the aftermath of the battle, and at the Ash Judge kneeling on the ground, its body completely torn apart in a situation like this. Do we really report it to Captain Finn too? If only her sister were here, she would definitely make a better decision. Tiona felt a headache coming on. Looking at Ron's figure about to leave, she nudged the elf girl beside her, whose eyes were filled with complicated emotions. What are you spacing out for? We're heading back. Lafia nodded lightly. This strange adventure beyond the fog gate, the Ash Judge, the Pussivman virus had indeed, to some extent, completely overturned her understanding of the world. But she didn't dwell on that aspect too much. She only knew one thing: Ron was someone she could trust completely. And that alone was enough. However, after witnessing Ron's battle just now as a mage, the elf girl felt like her entire worldview was starting to collapse. After leaving the fog gate, they finally returned to the familiar dungeon environment. Even though it was still a dim cave passage, that sense of familiarity made them feel at ease. At least, they didn't have to worry about being infected by that kind of strange virus. If I remember correctly, adventurers should have a limit on their magic slots, right? Walking at the back of the group, Lafia spoke absent-mindedly, letting Ron clear out the special monsters ahead. She lowered her voice and asked the senior beside her. Although she herself didn't possess magic, Tiona still had a decent understanding of it through her experience as an adventurer in Rio. For example, Lady Riveria. She only has 3 spells. Lady Riveria can alter the nature of her magic power to produce different effects. Why are you suddenly asking this? Feeling the gaze on her face, Lafia didn't feel uncomfortable. She simply shook her head and began recalling the various magical methods Ron had used during this time in the dungeon. First, there was the magic blade formed from red lightning. A wide coverage spell with overwhelming destructive power. She felt it could already rival LV. Shattering crystal. The dragon head projection that spewed flames. Just these alone were enough to completely fill up Ron's magic slots. Then what about that barrier he used at the very beginning, when facing Lanciax, which could absorb fire? How was that supposed to be explained? More importantly, Lafia wasn't even sure if that was the full extent of Ron's abilities. The dungeon's difficulty so far hadn't been high. Was he still holding back more trump cards? I don't get it. It just feels like Ron uses way too many different types of magic. She cleared her chaotic thoughts and finally reached that conclusion. Could it be that he could actually learn the techniques used by monsters, and even break through the limitations of magic slots? I don't know either. Without any talent for magic, Tiona couldn't give her an answer. But Lafia was clearly overlooking something important. After thinking for a moment, she said, I don't know if you've noticed. The magic Ron uses doesn't seem to require chanting at all. Short chant magic did exist in Rio. But instantaneous, chantless magic, just thinking about it made Lafia's scalp tingle. Imagine facing an experienced adventurer like that in battle. When both sides were evenly matched and suddenly a powerful spell was launched right in your face, with no time to react or dodge. The entire battle would instantly be overturned. That's why I'm saying, don't compare yourself to geniuses. You'll just end up thinking they're monsters. The elf girl's emotions were written all over her face. It was hard to imagine that Lafia, seen as the successor to the Nine Hell, could look like this. Tiona didn't tease her. She simply sighed softly. Tarnished. That title was fitting. Even though this expedition hadn't ended yet, she could already foresee Ron's existence would become something no adventurer in Rio could ever overcome. A monster, no doubt about it. And the worst part? He's a hard-working monster. Lafia didn't deny it. Her gaze drifted forward. In the distance, the tall figure of the boy was currently facing off against a mutated, massive minotaur. At that moment, Ron was wielding the strange spiral greatsword he had pulled from the Ash Judge's chest. Perhaps because there were too many of those black-skinned minotaurs, or perhaps simply because he wanted to test the power of the Godslayer greatsword right before the elf girl's eyes, the blazing flames, black flames that seemed capable of reducing everything to nothing, instantly engulfed the spiral blade. Even from such a great distance, she could still clearly feel that aura of annihilation originating from the very essence of existence itself. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 191, Chapter 191, Queen's Black Flame, the True Floor Boss Chamber. 1259 words. As long as he was inside the dungeon, and his revival uses were sufficient, Ron could afford to go all out, especially when it came to burning through his life force to unleash that exclusive slash. Queen's Black Flame. Just as its name implied, pitch black flames, dark as ink, completely wrapped around the spiral greatsword. The black flames had no temperature. Yet they carried an authority that seemed capable of burning everything in existence. And unlike an Elden Ring, as long as he had enough life force to consume, the Elden Ring weapon Godslayer's greatsword could maintain this overpowering state indefinitely. Gotta say. At least it looks cool as hell. After all, it was specifically effective against gods. Against the mutated, dark-skinned minotaur before him, simply smashing wouldn't be enough to kill it. He had to use other methods. Compared to Great Fortune, despite being of similar size, this weapon was clearly much lighter. Ron stared at the minotaur before him, its skin dark, its physique massively built, and without using any fancy techniques, he stepped forward decisively. As the Godslayer's greatsword swung down, the pitch-black flames carved a fleeting arc of sword light through the air. As a spiral greatsword, only its tip was truly sharp, the rest could practically be treated like a blunt club. But under the influence of its exclusive Ash of War, it produced an unexpectedly devastating effect. The moment the black flame made contact with the minotaur, it clung to its skin like a parasitic curse. The creature's sparse fur began to emit a foul, burnt stench under the flames. The monster's pained roar echoed through the narrow cave passage. Its crimson eyes lost all rationality. Instead of counterattacking Ron, it dropped the massive axe in its hand and tried to extinguish the flames with its bare palms. But the Minotaur's resistance was ultimately futile. That flame capable of burning even gods spread visibly due to its actions, igniting the thick, calloused flesh of its palms. The damage wasn't immediately fatal. But the pain from the burning was unavoidable. That's a bit ridiculous. Why does this black flame feel even more disgusting than the pus of men? The good news, this weapon could only be used normally by him. If he increased the attack frequency of the Godslayer's greatsword, sooner or later he could burn the Minotaur to death purely through the Queen's black flame. However, the cost of using this weapon was just as obvious. Ron could clearly feel it. An indescribable energy within his body was being continuously drained by the sword in his hand. Realizing this, he decisively cancelled the Ash of War. As the supply of life force ceased, the black flames coating the spiral greatsword extinguished at a visible speed. Even that brief usage had drained enough life force to make Ron feel a long-lost sense of weakness. This exclusive Ash of War was different from the power within, skill from the Ashen Ones, save at least it didn't subject the user to physical torment. Instead, it left an indelible effect on the Minotaur in the distance. If he wanted a quick finish, now would be the best time to press the attack. But as Ron looked at the flames nearly engulfing the Minotaur's upper body, he chose not to move. He wanted to see just how long the black flame effect from this exclusive skill would last. It shouldn't just burn it to death outright. Up ahead, the Minotaur's upper body was already swallowed by black flames. The stench of scorched skin and fur drifted through the cave with the faint breeze, saturating the surrounding environment. Because of the pain, that dark-skinned Minotaur, ironically the lucky one, rolled frantically across the cave floor, its massive, flesh mountain-like body thrashing about. Its already charred skin split open further as a result of its own movements. And just as he had expected, this black flame did not grow more intense as it spread. Instead, the flickering fire gradually died out once its fuel was completely exhausted. The agony ravaging its body did not drive the Minotaur to flee. After extinguishing the flames on its surface, it struggled back to its feet, grabbed the massive axe it had dropped, and its crimson eyes seemed to bleed. That violent killing intent was practically taking on physical form. What the hell was it even saying? He couldn't understand a word of the Minotaur's guttural speech. At the very least, as a human, Ron had no way of comprehending its language, but he could roughly guess. He chose not to continue using the Godslayer's greatsword. This weapon really could only be used like a blunt club. Against a high HP, tank-type floor boss, it might prove useful, but using it on a Minotaur like this just felt like a waste of exploration time. So Ron returned to his greatsword style once more. The injuries inflicted by the black flame were already horrific to the naked eye. And when dealing with monsters, the best method was to finish them cleanly and efficiently. Kill, don't torture. Having already fought Minotaurs back on the 5th floor, and with this one already heavily wounded, dealing with it now posed no difficulty at all. The battle ended quickly. Looking at the magic stone dropped on the ground, Ron made a rough judgment about the floor they were currently on. At the very least, it had to be around the 15th floor. Just don't know. If we've been gone this long, will they come deeper into the dungeon looking for us? However, without the influence of his despicable outsider skill, the dungeon returning to its normal difficulty would actually make things much easier for them. Following behind Ron, even encountering a mutated Minotaur no longer stirred much reaction from Lafia and Tiona, who had already experienced the fog gate. After all, compared to something like the Ash Judge and that grotesquely mutated form, the native monsters of this dungeon now seemed almost decent-looking by comparison. The only thing that truly surprised them was probably Ron's spiral greatsword and that utterly terrifying black flame. Not sure why, but I always feel like Ron being hated by the dungeon and triggering abnormal events is completely normal. This dungeon expedition had quickly brought Tiona and Lafia closer together. After whispering between themselves, they both came to the same conclusion: Ron's outrageous talent being targeted by the dungeon was far from baseless. He had mastered all kinds of combat methods. He could even replicate the techniques used by monsters. And more than that, even after sustaining fatal injuries, he would trigger magic at the brink of death and stand back up again. From the dungeon's perspective, a monster like that absolutely shouldn't be allowed to exist. You couldn't beat him. You couldn't kill him. And most importantly, under such high-intensity pressure, his strength was growing at an exponential rate. The cave passage was eerily quiet. So quiet that the whispered conversation between the two girls behind him was clearly heard by Ron, who was leading the way up front. Was it really appropriate to be trash-talking him so openly behind his back? Back when his stats hadn't caught up yet, this Souls-like dungeon had caused him no small amount of trouble. Right now, he had merely endured long enough to come out on top. However, as he looked ahead at the suddenly widening environment of the floor, he lost all desire to complain. Because in the distance ahead that looked very much like a true boss room. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 192, Chapter 192, The Encroaching Prophetic Dream, Daphne's Decisiveness. 1314 words at the expedition camp. Daphne gazed at the hourglass before her, fine sand slowly trickling down. Before entering the dungeon, she had been using this primitive method to keep track of time. Reaching the mid-floors, clearing the initial danger line, and the aberrant monsters on floor 13, it had taken a total of 12 hours. After their rest, the sand in the hourglass had just finished running out. And then when Ron decided to head deeper into the dungeon to scout information for the team, Daphne started timing again. Now, with only half the sand remaining in the upper chamber, there was still no sign of Ron and the others returning. At that thought, the girl couldn't help but frown. She turned her gaze toward the nearby Mikoto, who was resting, and couldn't resist asking, "Miss Mikoto, in the past, when you explored with Captain Ron, did you ever run into any unusual situations? Facing Mikoto's gaze, Daphne quickly explained, he's been gone for quite a long time. At the mention of Ron, the drowsiness in Mikoto's eyes vanished instantly. Hugging the katana in her arms, she straightened up and carefully recalled her past exploration experiences with him. Unusual situations. If encountering special monsters only counted as Ron's daily routine, then there really hadn't been any. But she quickly remembered that time, during the Takamikazuchi Familia's expedition, when they happened to meet Ron on floor 6. Even now, the memory remained vivid. It hadn't been that Ron went there on purpose. According to what he had said at the time, when he was heading toward deeper floors, he somehow ended up there without realizing it. Back then, Mikoto hadn't paid it much attention. She had simply taken it as Ron's explanation. But now, after personally experiencing the difficulty of this Souls-like dungeon, she finally realized where the problem lay. If I'm not mistaken, there probably was something unusual. Thinking of that possibility, the samurai girl from the Far East decisively stood up, her tone turning grave. It's the dungeon environment. It definitely changes because of Ron's presence. I've heard him mention before he was originally heading to the next floor, but the stairway passage somehow connected directly to a deeper floor instead. Because of Daphne and Mikoto's conversation, Cassandra, who had been resting her head on her best friend's lap, now had her brows tightly knit, as if trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape from. It was the same familiar dream. A blazing furnace fire. But this time, she finally saw clearly within that sea of flames, several adventurers were engulfed. They were Ron, Lafia, and the others. The suffocating sensation was overwhelming. Cassandra suddenly sat up from the ground, immediately meeting Mikoto and her best friend Daphne's serious gazes. She paid no attention to the tense atmosphere. Her eyes quickly swept around, but she couldn't find any trace of Ron. She hurriedly asked, Captain Ron, has he come back? Even Tione in the distance, upon hearing this exchange, couldn't help but frown. She didn't doubt Mikoto's words. After all, she herself had witnessed how the dungeon environment could change. The first person she thought of was her younger sister Tiona, who had insisted on following Ron. An inexplicable irritation rose in her heart, but she still forced herself to stay calm. Tione looked toward Daphne. How much time has passed? It should be about 6 hours. The hourglass has only half its sand left. If they had only gone to explore floor 14, given her trust in her captain's strength, Daphne didn't think anything would go wrong, especially with a level 5 adventurer accompanying him. Just going to floor 14 would absolutely not take this long. After quickly organizing the information in her mind, she said, Captain Ron and Senior Tiona, it's very likely that, due to changes in the dungeon environment, headed to deeper floors. Under normal circumstances, Tione wouldn't have been this worried. After witnessing the strength of the ancient dragon Lanciax, as well as aberrant monsters like the giant dog. When it came to her sister, to be honest, she wasn't actually worried about her safety. After all, she was a level 5 adventurer, and the strength Ron had displayed was also formidable. Not to mention Lafia, whom she had watched grow to this point. Just as Tione was thinking, trying to approach the situation from Captain Finn's perspective, Mikoto, who had gone to investigate, returned with rather bad news: the stairway to the next floor. At the time, Captain Ron and Senior Tiona used that very stairway to head to floor 14 for advanced scouting. After all, there were adventurers from the Hestia Familia present. Tione, who already had a fiery temper, managed to keep it in check at this moment, but she still couldn't help cursing. It wasn't directed at Tiona or the others. It was simply she had never imagined the dungeon would pull something like this. Ron wanting to head to deeper floors to scout was actually easy to understand. He wanted to gather information on the monsters in the upcoming floors to ensure smoother exploration. So, at the time, she hadn't objected. And the disappearance of the stairway, from another angle, confirmed the truth of Daphne's earlier words. Tione took several deep breaths, calming herself down. She decisively shook her head. Maybe they just can't make it back for a while. Looking on the bright side, Ron and the others hadn't encountered a floor boss, they had simply gone to further floors where there were more monsters, slowing their return. In that case, what they needed to consider next was how to regroup. When I was resting just now, I had a bad dream. The dream had been so vivid that Cassandra still hadn't forgotten it. When Tioni made that judgment, she finally couldn't hold back anymore. I think Captain Ron and the others really aren't in a good situation right now. It feels like they ran into a floor boss. In that dream, I saw a giant completely engulfing Captain Ron. Even though prophetic dreams sounded absurd, when it involved Ron, the girl still did her best to insist. But seeing Tioni's confused expression somewhat unmoved Cassandra's heart filled with despair, and even more with a sense of helplessness. Other than Ron, no one believed what she said. Really? In my recent dreams, the scenes I saw, they've all come true. She could only explain weakly, but under the influence of the magic leaking from her body, it only made the surrounding adventurers think this was nothing more than a meaningless joke. Why won't any of you believe me? Having already foreseen the danger that was about to happen, yet being powerless to do anything about it, that feeling nearly swallowed Cassandra whole. She could only shrink her shoulders, lowering her already bowed head even further. And at that moment, standing beside her, Daphne frowned and made her decision. Senior Tioni, regardless of whether this so-called dream will come true in the end, this concerns Captain Ron's safety. We really can't just stand by and do nothing. After we find Ron, let's regroup at the safe Floravira town on floor 18. Don't say sorry. It had already come to this point. No matter what, Tiona was her sister, and there was also Lafia's safety to consider. Once Daphne made this decision, there was no staying out of it. Tioni felt a headache coming on, shaking her head lightly. She hadn't expected the cohesion of the Hestia Familia to be this strong. With a helpless tone, she said, then let's assume the worst-case scenario. We're companions now. Even if the chance of danger is slim, no matter what, we can't just stand by and do nothing. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 193, Chapter 193, no idea what to call this 1242 words the dungeon expedition. Since they had only just come into contact with souls-like mutated monsters, most of the fighting had been handled by Ron, who single-handedly held up the protective umbrella over the expedition. The two level 5 adventurers of the Loki Familia had basically not intervened at all. And then after losing the umbrella that Ron had been holding up, Daphne realized a very critical problem. The now calm dungeon wasn't raining at all. Why does it feel like these monsters are all pretty weak? After confirming that their next objective was to head deeper into the dungeon to search for Ron and Lafia, who had been separated due to the changes in the dungeon floors, they quickly finished preparing and set off. There were no souls-like monsters. And with Tioni also starting to fight, their advance speed was very fast. As for her best friend Cassandra's absurd prophetic dream, Daphne felt a strangely complicated emotion inside. If she had to describe it, it was probably that, on an emotional level, she felt it wasn't baseless, but rationally, she was faintly rejecting it. Let's calculate based on the worst-case scenario. She couldn't quite explain this feeling. But considering that Ron, as the captain of the Hestia Familia, hadn't shown any strange attitude toward her because of her former Apollo Familia affiliation, and had instead been willing to trust her, even telling her such an important secret, Daphne absolutely couldn't stand by and do nothing. Even if the crisis was truly as Cassandra had said, a battle on that level was indeed something she couldn't help with. But if she could bring along the strongest combat power of the expedition, the level 5 adventurer Tioni, it might be possible to effectively alleviate the crisis. I hope we can make it in time. A roaring furnace. The first thing Daphne thought of was Goliath, the floor boss of the 17th floor. Perhaps, within the secret Ron possessed, this was the mutation that would ultimately occur. Let's head straight to the 17th floor. As for the exact location, it's not particularly easy to find. The dungeon's environment was like a pyramid, except buried underground. The deeper one explored, the more vast each floor became. So-called compasses and various navigation devices would all lose their function. Moreover, Daphne had reason to suspect that the environment of the 17th floor had already been altered by the dungeon. If it really comes to it, we'll split up. At the very front of the expedition team, Mikoto's expression was extremely serious. After realizing that her captain might be in danger, she hadn't requested that the other members of the Familia accompany her. After all, they had only just joined the Familia not long ago, and some of them weren't even official members yet. The girl only knew that since they were members of the same Familia, when a companion might be in danger, one must have the resolve to risk one's life. Right now, things were naturally ideal. The entire expedition team was heading deeper. As for the concern, Daphne had raised, Mikoto cleanly cut down the hellhound in front of her, then explained, "I actually can roughly sense Ron's location. It's just rather vague." Yatano Shiragrasu, its effect was to allow her to sense the whereabouts of her fellow Familia members. It could only take effect on companions with the same fauna, and since she had only recently joined the Familia, the sensing effect wasn't very strong. At a time like this, there was no thought of hiding anything. She hadn't interacted much with Cassandra, and as for her vague, illusory dreams, they were hard to evaluate. But she could feel Ron's attitude toward her. Since even the captain was willing to trust her, then there was no problem. That's enough. But sometimes, as long as you have a clear direction, you can save a lot of effort. Daphne nodded quickly, swiftly completing the coordination work, letting Mikoto, who possessed sensing abilities, act as the navigator for locating Ron within the dungeon. They cut down every monster they encountered along the way, and quickly passed through the current floor. It was no different from the usual routine exploration of an adventurer party, except that, under the impression left by Cassandra's prophetic dream, the atmosphere had become far more tense. Gotta say, the members of the Hestia Familia actually seem pretty decent. This wasn't originally within Tioni's scope of observation, but one had to look at things comprehensively. The talent Ron possessed was enough to make even the captain want to cooperate with him. In that case, it was impossible to ignore the members of his own Familia. There would inevitably be contact in the future, and at the very least, their personalities and character needed to be reliable. And from this period of brief interaction, it was already clear they, compared to other adventurers in Ororio, all had their own strengths. As for strength, aside from Daphne, the former commander of the Apollo Familia, whom Tioni was somewhat familiar with, the others were all relatively unknown adventurers. But none of that mattered right now. In a dungeon trial of Ron's level of difficulty, it probably wouldn't take long before stories about their future would start spreading throughout Ororio. Very interesting. It really feels like Ron's appearance is gradually bringing life back to this stagnant pool that is Ororio. However, there was no time for Tioni to dwell on such thoughts. After swiftly killing all the monsters they encountered along the way, they continuously passed through the stairways of the middle floors, advancing toward their target floor. Floor 15. Floor 16. When Tioni, with an overwhelming display of strength, slaughtered all the minotaurs blocking the stairway and cleared the path leading to floor 17, she once again looked toward the Far East girl, whose brows were tightly furrowed. The feeling is pretty strong. Captain Ron is definitely on floor 17. Mikoto looked at the floor passage before her, using her skill Yatano Shiragrasu to sense. Compared to the vague and elusive feeling at the beginning, as the distance continued to close, the tracking effect brought by the skill grew stronger and stronger. Let's keep moving. Tioni shook her head lightly. She had never experienced an abnormal dungeon situation before. The floor boss Goliath, who usually appeared on floor 17, was only around level 4. Even if it had been strengthened, she estimated it would be at most around level 5. With Ron, Lafia, and her younger sister's strength, they might not be able to defeat it in a short time, but there was absolutely no need to worry about safety. To avoid the worst-case scenario, she took the lead and stepped into the slanted passage that extended downward, leading to floor 17. However, the moment she set foot in this part of the dungeon, Tioni immediately felt something unusual. Compared to the previous floors, it was noticeably colder. If she had to describe it, it was probably like when they had first reached the initial death line, after the dungeon had mutated the distinct malice they felt back then, but what she was sensing now seemed to be dozens of times stronger. The tan-skinned girl's expression gradually grew serious, an ominous premonition rising within her. She looked toward Mikoto again. Which way do we go next? Follow me. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 194, Chapter 194, Dionysus's Plan, a Fire Giant. 1175 words, how is it? Did you find any trace of Ron? Safe floor, Rivera Town. Philvis gazed at the broad, secure expanse before her. Unlike other floors used for exploration, the tranquil atmosphere here felt strangely out of place. Despite being deep within the dungeon, sunlight still shone down upon this place, giving the entire ecosystem an unusually peaceful appearance. Lush green grasslands, a spacious forest, and ahead, a street within the dungeon formed from makeshift shacks and temporary structures. This hidden world-like scenery did nothing to ease the tight furrow in the black-haired elf's brows. The members of Evolus she had dispatched had brought back no good news. In fact, they hadn't found any trace of Ron anywhere in the dungeon. At that moment, a young Paolum boy with a demonic tattoo on his cheek stepped forward and explained to Philvis, "Lady Philvis, I didn't see Ron. I did find other members of his familia on the 17th floor." In that case, could it be that they got separated inside the dungeon? This was a familia expedition. Getting separated during a coordinated dungeon exploration, was that even possible? Under normal circumstances, Philvis wouldn't have cared. But after that encounter in the dungeon, after witnessing the abnormal changes Ron had brought about, something like this, she couldn't judge so easily anymore. At the very least, none of the stairways leading to the safe floor had shown any trace of Ron arriving here. There was no way he could have simply vanished inside the dungeon. Ron had to still be somewhere above. The black-haired elf slightly furrowed her brows, her crimson eyes sweeping over the crowd as she spoke calmly, "Continue monitoring Ron's movements. Do not overlook any detail. Why go to such lengths to track Ron?" The sense of being ordered around left the Evolus members present with varying degrees of dissatisfaction. But faced with Philvis's overwhelming strength as a creature, even if they had complaints, they could only swallow them. "No problem. If you do encounter Ron, find a way to regroup with him. Take the initiative to create conflict, ideally, drive him toward this safe floor." This plan was not devised by Philvis. More precisely, it was led by the god behind the scenes, Dionysus. She merely acted as a supervisor. Drive Ron to Rivera Town. And here use the Evolus attack incident of slaughtering adventurers as a point of contact. Offer him help in a moment of danger, and quickly establish trust. She looked at the adventurers before her, each wearing a different expression. Even though her soul had long since ascended, her keen elven instincts still allowed Philvis to sense the dissatisfaction hidden in their eyes. She spoke calmly, "For the madness plan to proceed smoothly, Ron is an indispensable piece. The future you all wish to see will soon be realized." Her tone carried no fluctuation. Because they were all nothing more than expendable materials for this plan. In other words, these Evolus members were already as good as dead. As for the innocent adventurers who would be caught up in the chaos to come, Dionysus had promised, once the madness plan was fully completed, those who had been sacrificed would be revived in the form of creatures, restored to life by the corrupted spirits, and continue to exist. Your efforts will all be worth it. Fine then. Lady Philvis, what you said about slaughtering the adventurers on Rivera Town, that still stands, right? I've long been sick of those people. Of course. Watching the backs of those adventurers as they left, Philvis's figure vanished once more into the forest. Yet at that very moment, a sudden thunderous noise from above drew her attention again. She halted her steps toward Rivera Town and looked up. The keen instincts she had possessed in her former life as an adventurer had not faded. On the contrary, with the growth of her strength, they had become even sharp enough to pinpoint the exact source. The 17th floor. Could it be? Ron and the others have already reached the floor boss Goliath's chamber. At the thought of that possibility, a rare trace of curiosity surfaced in Phylvis's otherwise unfathomable eyes. Even if she had merely inherited all the memories from before this body's death, some habits could not be changed. Including one's nature. When she first regained awareness, she had constantly denied her own existence. It was only after Dionysus's explanation that she finally came to accept it. And now the mere fact that an adventurer could trigger an abnormal event within the dungeon was already novel enough. More importantly, Ron himself was a key piece in realizing that dream. It seems I should go take a look as well. If the secrets Ron carried were to trigger some uncontrollable abnormality, then there would be no need to rely on the turmoil at Rivera Town to gain his trust. Extending a hand in a moment of crisis would be far more efficient. Was a lie. After 6 years of living in Ora Rio, even Phylvis herself didn't know whether the outcome promised by Dionysus's madness plan was truly what she desired. As the plan neared completion, the black-haired elf girl instead found herself feeling an unfamiliar sense of confusion. If this so-called plan had merely been her reason to continue living as a creature, then now, with everything having come this far, perhaps the answer she sought was already within reach. And yet, she couldn't quite put that indescribable feeling into words. The fog gate that had appeared before him was not the condition for leaving the current floor. It wasn't until he saw the vast floor boss chamber ahead that Ron finally felt a sense of clarity. The dungeon really has no good intentions at all. When ordinary mutated monsters couldn't deal with him, it always tried to set up something big behind the scenes. He hadn't forgotten that before this Familia expedition, Cassandra had a prophetic dream. What he was about to face next was exactly this thing. The floor boss Goliath, originally located on the 17th floor, after undergoing soul corruption due to his despicable outsider skill, had turned into the fire giant from Elden Ring. Was this kind of development even reasonable? Ron felt the malice continuously radiating from the chamber ahead, and for once, he paused in his steps. After all, this concerned safety. Could he win? Thinking back to the floor boss ancient dragon Lanciax he had encountered in the mid-level floors, its strength had already surpassed most level for adventurers. The fire giant he was about to face next, even conservatively speaking, would be around level 5. On his own, Ron wasn't entirely confident. But when his gaze shifted to Lafia and Tiona beside him in terms of team composition, they were undoubtedly stronger than before. There was no real reason to hesitate. Then, looking toward the distant, faintly firelit boss chamber ahead, Ron spoke in a bright tone, "Lafia, get ready for the next battle. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 195, Chapter 195, Peak LV, 5 Combat Power. 1234 words without Iron Fist. Alexander, could one really defeat the fire giant? To be honest, when he first encountered this boss in Elden Ring, it really was a headache. That massive ape clutching a giant pot lid relying purely on its size advantage had flipped him countless times. Stay under its crotch, and the damage felt like scratching an itch. Look down, and all you could do was trim its toenails. Look up, and all you saw was. It was pure torture. And now, in the world of DanMachi, having to face the fire giant again, Ron would be lying if he said he wasn't at least a little nervous. But reality was different from the game. The tarnished in Souls-like games had relatively poor mobility. But as a LV3 adventurer, in terms of speed and agility, Ron could maneuver far more effectively than in a Souls-like game. The trade-off, however, was this: he couldn't perform stagger-lock tactics like in the game. A true, literal no-hit clear against the fire giant in the real world. Stepping into the floor boss chamber, the already spacious cavern passage suddenly opened up even further. Ron swept his gaze across the surroundings. The atmosphere wasn't particularly dark. On both sides of the chamber walls, blazing flame altars hung in place. Though the firelight was faint, it was enough to illuminate the entire boss room. Because of that, even from nearly 100 meters away, Ron could clearly see the fire giant, that massive ape, quietly waiting inside the chamber. This damn thing, the size difference is seriously ridiculous, isn't it? Nearly 30 meters tall. Its grayish-brown, pale skin looked like it had been weathered by endless years. Reddish-yellow fur draped over its shoulders, and the muscles beneath were unbelievably well developed. As if sensing the arrival of intruders, the fire giant lifted its massive pot-lid weapon crafted from some unknown material with one hand, and began moving toward Ron and Lafia. Because of its enormous size, every step it took caused faint tremors to ripple through the ground. Hard to even evaluate. Compared to Lanciax, the fire giant before them was clearly even larger, and the sense of oppression it brought was far stronger. Even with mental preparation, now that he was truly facing a floor boss, Ron could feel just how small he was in comparison. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. He didn't forget to explain to Lafia and Tiona beside him, that's the one. The fire giant, if we want to leave this floor, we have to take this thing down. The atmosphere grew slightly tense. Mainly because the situation was clearly different from what Tiona had expected. Even though she had already accepted the idea of an abnormal dungeon event, actually facing this giant head-on still gave her an indescribable feeling. With her LV-5 strength, combined with Ron and Lafia, could they really defeat it? Her past experience in dungeon exploration told her the odds were extremely slim. After all, even Ace from her familia, when soloing the floor boss of the 37th floor, had Riveria backing her up. And in terms of strength, she was definitely not stronger than Ace. Nor did she possess a monster-slaying specialty skill like Ace's Avenger. But at a time like this there was no way she could back down. We can try. The tan-skinned Amazonas girl put away the smile on her face. Even her light brown eyes were now filled with determination. Two fighters comparable to LV-4 plus herself, if they could pull this off successfully. Maybe reaching the great feat of advancing to LV-6 could also be accomplished smoothly. I'll do my best. A flower raised in a greenhouse can never withstand the wind and rain outside. At least, that was how Lafia saw it. Only after truly experiencing Ron's day-to-day dungeon exploration did she realize just how easy her previous expeditions had been. And now, this was the chance to take a step forward. As that thought crossed her mind, the elf girl's gaze subconsciously shifted to Ron's back ahead of her. Even though the gap in strength between him and the fire giant before them was immense still, that upright figure of the young man somehow gave her a sense of security. Then get ready to fight. If it were Lanciax, Ron could have fought solo, testing the power boost from reaching LV. But the fire giant before them was different. It was definitely stronger than the Black Goliath. He didn't have a skill like the original protagonist, Bel Cranel, that could charge up, turn the tide, and create miracles in desperate situations. What he could do was keep fighting. Use every method at his disposal, no matter the cost, to completely slay the fire giant before him, and make it to the safe floor to recover. There was no need for tactical planning. With their current lineup, there simply wasn't any necessity for it. Ron and Tiona would act as the frontliners, drawing the fire giant's attention. As for ranged fire support, that naturally fell to Lafia. That was how Tiona saw it. In fact, there was a tacit understanding between them. But just as she finished preparing for battle, gripping her massive twin-bladed weapon, the girl saw it, Ron, greatsword in hand, charging straight at the fire giant without hesitation. That fast. Even wielding a massive greatsword, his speed wasn't affected in the slightest. The distance that had seemed considerable just moments ago was shrinking rapidly. 5 adventurer, how could she be slower than this monster rookie? But just as Tiona, unwilling to be outdone, was about to show him what a veteran was capable of, the battlefield ahead suddenly changed. The towering fire giant slowly raised its arm. But that so-called slow was only relative to its enormous size. The flat, circular pot-lid weapon in its grasp when swung unleashed a howling gale. Even from far away, the tan-skinned girl could feel the overwhelming power behind the floor boss's movement. And what the fire giant did next made her breathing stop. That flat, circular pot lid came crashing down onto the ground. Spiderweb-like cracks spread outward from the point of impact. Then, finding leverage, it pried the embedded pot lid back up. Boom. The ground, already fractured like a spiderweb, was torn apart as the fire giant levered it upward. Countless chunks of rock surged forward, burying Ron, who was charging straight ahead in a deadly barrage. Dust filled the air, blocking all visibility. But Tiona still felt as if her heart had been seized. Yet her rational mind told her that she absolutely couldn't rush in now, otherwise she'd be caught in the attack as well. This thing, if you put it among LV 5 level opponents, it's definitely at the very top, right? Of course, she was referring to the fire giant. If the situation weren't so complicated, she would have rushed in already, just to see whether that ground-upheaving attack that had completely engulfed Ron had injured him. But he should be fine. After all, back when facing the floor boss Lanciax, even after taking the boss's full-force attack head-on, Ron had still come out unharmed. Then the girl saw it. From the top of the cavern wall, using a grappling hook and rope, swinging toward the floor boss fire giant, that familiar figure. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 196, Chapter 196, A Pedicure Master. What the hell is this guy even doing? 1312 words, why the hell is this guy flying? Tiona had imagined many ways to dodge. For example, blasting open a path with magic, or using that great sword to forcibly block the fire giant's attack. But the one thing she had never imagined was Ron evading it in such an effortless, almost casual manner. Even before entering the dungeon, the black-haired girl had noticed the armguard covering Ron's left hand, assuming it was purely defensive. She had never expected that this thing could display such an effect in a life-or-death situation. I wonder if I can get one too. That was just how simple her personality was. However, what needed to be dealt with right now was still the fire giant in front of them. After witnessing Ron's performance, the tan-skinned Amazoness temporarily set those thoughts aside. What she wanted to know more was just how far this guy could go without her and Lafia's help. At first encounter, the fire giant would most likely use its massive pan-like shield for a surprise opening attack. Compared to the mud and snow mixture from Elden Ring, the floor boss here had already made Ron feel the sheer beauty of raw stats from just a brief exchange. Damn it. This thing can even rip up the stone ground with brute force alone. If that pen slams into me, I'd be bruised black and blue in an instant. Relying on the shinobi prosthetic from Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, Ron had already prepared his countermeasure using the grappling hook and rope to anchor onto the rocky ceiling above, retracting and extending it in advance whenever an attack came. In terms of mobility, as he swung himself toward the fire giant, Ron couldn't help but narrow his eyes at the devastated terrain beneath his feet. Stronger than expected. But thinking about how the Black Goliath encountered by Bel Cranel in the original DanMachi could rival level 5, in this Souls-like enhanced dungeon, it was only natural for the fire giant to be even more absurd. Ron had every reason to kill the fire giant, no matter what. After roughly gauging the gap in strength, he felt no fear. If anything, he could clearly feel the battle intent flowing through his blood, gradually boiling over. Relying on the high mobility of the shinobi prosthetic, Ron swiftly moved to the floor boss's front, decisively retracting the grappling rope completely. He raised his head and was met with the towering body of the fire giant, along with a foul stench hitting him head-on. Damn it! Only at close range did Ron truly grasp the difference in size. Even just one of its feet was larger than his entire body. Facing the fire giant directly, he hadn't felt nauseated before, but now that he was this close, a kind of indescribable discomfort rose from within. Without hesitation, He swung the great sword Great Fortune in his hands. Chapter 197. A sharp arc of blade light flashed past in an instant. The scraping master decides on one final dance. The fire giant wasn't an all-around stat monster at fire giant like defense. The best approach was simple stacks lead status effects as hard as possible. The bad news, kite with mobility. He felt like a damn pedicure master scraping calluses. Grind it down slowly. Even with the extreme sharpness of Great Fortune, when he put his full margin for error provided by his revival skill, it only left behind a shallow wound like a scratch from a kitten. He still had 2 chances left. As if annoyed by the provocation of an ant, the giant simply lifted its foot fully enchanted, and stomped down heavily. The eerie, blood-red blow shattered rocks flying toward Ron, like the blood forcing him to leap backward to dodge. Relying on the healing gourd from the Sekiro template, Ron could dodging the chunks of rock splashing toward him. Ron quickly adjusted his abdomen, didn't fade his mind racing as he searched for the correct way to deal with the monster in the distance. He clenched his teeth black flame and spat out each word. Use the Godslayer's greatsword and burn this thing to death with its weapon skill. After personally witnessing Ron's smooth-as silk the fire giant move and those disturbingly sinister enchanted drain from the weapon skill alone meant this fight couldn't last long. She really wanted to remade inside the skills effect. Who the hell was actually from the country of blood and fighting here? Do I have to use Great Fortune to commit seppuku obvious and throw myself into the arms of the Lord of Blood? For fun, he clearly had some kind of headache coming on that could temporarily boost his weapon's offensive power. Was right there for all to see, but understanding is not equal to able to deal any lethal damage. What kind of sane person fights like this? Status. Tiona, even if it makes just chip damage, she was sooner or later there'd be a chance to make Ron's gaze so different from his usual self. Now savage and feral, the girl instinctively looked away. Giant clench its fist. She really was afraid of people who didn't care about their own lives, and quickly pulled back to a safe distance. Even in the arenas of the country of blood and fighting with Tiona, she had never seen someone this insane. Concisely. Although her own skill set was completely different from his, even with a second-tier weapon, a full-force attack can only leave a very slight attack power when injured. The key massively enhanced all stats. The fire giant's regeneration is also very strong. Despite having mastered these skills for a long time alone, Tiona had never once activated them on purpose. The situation was. But now, looking at Ron's battleless eyes, the only one who could deal massive damage was her hands. Looking at the was just another kind of rabid by step. The trembling of the ground grew more intense with every step. The fire giant capable of healing most fatal injuries was Amazonas had a strong premonition this thing was definitely stronger than Tiona. Felt a strange urge to try. Ace could handle it, but if it were her, could she really do the same? What, you want to throw yourself behind the Bloodlord's embrace as well? Even if the weapon enchantment wasn't permanent in front of them, they could still the blood absorbed by the blades completely dried up, and if her sister and the others noticed something was wrong, maybe they could make their way through the dungeon floors to provide support. As Ron felt his body steadily recovering now back to a level where he could fight properly, he looked forward. If it really comes down to it, we should retreat. The fire giant was already closing in. However, Tiona didn't receive a reply from Ron. Weapon clutched in its hands. Just as she assumed that meant agreement, forcing himself to calm down. At the boy beside her only to see him let go of the greatsword in his hand. Relying on his extreme speed, he drew the 2 short blades strapped to his thighs from the fire giant's hands. For some reason, he didn't charge in recklessly like a moth from the country of blood and fighting. Instead, he circled around the perimeter. Fearless warriors felt an inexplicable chill run down her spine. Came with a clear drawback. This scene felt familiar. No matter what, but as she watched Ron's next action, the words she wanted to say came as well pick a better angle. At the same time, are you trying harassing the fire giant from behind? The boy, also by time was usually clean to cast her magic, now had veins bulging across his forehead, both front and rear. His expression twisted and ferocious as he gritted his teeth. Watching Ron move into harass he held in reverse grip where she couldn't just stand by any longer. Instead, he pointed their sharp edges at his own abdomen. To imitate Ron's method. Without any armor, this is the sharp blades pierced through his clothes. In the short term, into his body would unleash much greater power, but there was still no way to quickly take down his abdomen. Not a single drop of blood had already suffered heavy damage. Instead, those 2 short blades became enveloped in a crimson, end up becoming a burden to the team. At the same time. Ron's face gradually turned pale to be thrown into a situation while like this right after starting a dungeon expedition, but compared to that an indescribable sense of wickedness, would much rather fight the fire giant in front of her. At feeling the visual impact wasn't nearly as overwhelming. His clenched teeth trembling until the 2 blades had absorbed enough wide area attack magic wouldn't be very out from his abdomen. She had to concentrate on the power into a single point to break through the floor. Ron finally managed to straighten her spells. Ark's ray was facing absolutely the best choice who stood there in silence, looking as if not they had far just ahead. Seen a ghost. The fire giant had already halted its steps. Obviously, its full attention I'm getting ready to fight this fire giant who was harassing it from behind. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon. Plenty of time you can check it out. As her magic power was guided forth, a pure white radiance symbolizing absolute purity began to gather around the elven girl, eventually shaping itself into a magnificent, pristine arrow. With the support of fairy cannon, the already absurdly powerful magic was amplified even further, its effect doubled. Penetrate, arrow of absolute accuracy Alio. As the chant concluded, the arrow formed entirely from magic shone so brightly that it completely drowned out the flames lining the cavern walls as it shot forward in an instant. Like a brilliant meteor, it carved a trail of starlight through the air. With its homing effect, there was no need to worry about hitting allies, and the target it locked onto was the fire giant's chest. Straight at the heart. The already massive pool of magic power, boosted by the skill's amplification, allowed Ark's ray to unleash firepower on par with a level 5 adventurer. The explosive force was enough to break through the fire giant's defenses, blasting open a bloody wound, accompanied by the floor boss's deafening roar echoing through the boss room along with the effect of forced stop. It worked. But Lafia's body couldn't make any further movements. Her thoughts went blank, and a violent ringing echoed in her ears. Forced stop. Just as the name implied. Even at a distance, its effect was overwhelming. As for the one directly facing the shockwave master, Ron, who had devoted himself to the art of ankle-scraping chip damage, wasn't affected too heavily. His movements remained sharp. However, fresh blood was visibly dripping from his ears, and the nauseating sensation of his internal organs churning couldn't be ignored. The fire giant's roar could no longer be measured in mere decibels. He only felt his eardrums screaming in pain, fighting purely on instinct. A barrage of sword strikes, as dense and relentless as a storm, continued to carve wound after wound into the floor boss. Relying on the bleed status effect, even with the fire giant's powerful regeneration, the cuts from the short swords still caused thick, dark red blood to flow continuously. But for the floor boss, the damage was nothing more than a drop in the ocean. How long the hell am I supposed to keep scraping like this? No one could give him an answer. After working himself to the bone for so long, Ron felt his condition steadily worsening under the direct impact. From behind his back, he pulled out the newly acquired spiral greatsword. Godslayer's greatsword. At this point there was only one option left. The final dance. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller Chapter 198, Chapter 198, Queen's Black Flame. This is my final pulse. Queen's Black Flame. A greatsword capable of hunting even gods. There was no way it would be useless against a fire giant. Squeezing out the very last bit of life from his already ruined body, he turned it into black flame, and burned the floor boss before him to ashes. If I collapse later, remember to move my body somewhere cool. Compared to goblin guards and lanciacs, if the thing in front of him actually had an HP bar, it would probably be even longer than Ron's own life. They hadn't even scraped out the fire giant's second phase yet. And besides, if he faced that forced stop roar at close range again, Ron had a feeling his internal organs would be completely shattered. At this point, he couldn't maintain focus anyway. So he might as well burn everything to the end. He could feel a tingling numbness spread across his entire body. Raising his hand, he wiped the warm blood off his cheek. Relying on the bleed status, even if he fought by trading his life for damage, even if he burned through both of his revival chances, he still might not be able to kill it outright. Holding her twin great blades, already launching a fierce offensive against the fire giant, when Tiona heard Ron's reminder, her backward step widened noticeably. She pulled back to a safe distance. The tan-skinned Amazoness stared ahead at Ron's miserable state, with blood slowly seeping from the corners of his eyes, nose, and ears. Her heartbeat nearly stopped. Near-death recovery. To be honest, she had seen this unique magic with her own eyes. It was Ron's final trump card. A symbol that the concept of death had already been stripped away from him. But saying something like, "Move my corpse." Anyone who heard that would feel something hard to describe. Before Tiona could even ask, her gaze caught Ron again. His steps were still steady and agile, as he raised the spiral greatsword taken from the Ash Judge. The black flames blazing upon it more brilliant than ever before. That aura of extinction seemed to point directly at the very origin of existence itself. Tiona had never seen such a bizarre weapon. Or perhaps magic. And the price was clear. Ron, still in his youth, now had streaks of white appearing at his temples as if his life force was being forcibly drained by the magic. What the hell are you trying to do? Wasn't the plan if they couldn't win, they'd retreat from the floor boss room, wait for Tione's support, and if that still didn't work, wait for the Loki Familia to handle it. So why was he suddenly going full self-destruct again? Tiona felt like her head was about to explode. But even at such a critical moment, she didn't retreat. Instead, she chose to trust Ron's decision. Someone with a future broader than any adventurer, there was no way he would joke around with his own life, right? And just as Tiona guessed, Ron was actually terrified of death. He hadn't lost that fear just because of his revival ability. But if this life couldn't be preserved no matter what, then why not squeeze out a bit more AoE damage before dying? As if responding to Ron's resolve, the Godslayer's greatsword began draining his life force even faster. In exchange, the Queen's black flame grew even more violently intense. It had no temperature. And yet from those black flames, as if born from the deepest abyss of hell, one could still feel the overwhelming offensive power contained within. Damn it. After killing this fire giant, you better drop me some damn good loot. Feeling his life force rapidly slipping away, Ron charged toward the fire giant once more. Each swing of the spiral blade released arcs of black flame. When they struck the floor boss's massive body, they left behind flames that would never extinguish no matter what. Ignoring defense. In an extremely short span of time, that rootless black flame burned straight through the fire giant's thick outer layer, and the air filled with the stench of charred flesh. The giant's language was incomprehensible. But the damage caused by the Queen's black flame, the fire giant could feel it directly. And it hurt far more than that elf's magic. Unlike before, it no longer treated Ron, who had been merely scratching its hardened skin under its feet, as something negligible. It even had a premonition: if it let this black flame continue burning, it would die. So the fire giant raised its foot high, trying to crush him like an ant. I know your feet are pretty damn impressive. But do you really have to go this far? If it were some foot fetish freak, even those cracked, calloused, dead skin-covered feet of the fire giant would probably look beautiful to him. But clearly, Ron wasn't that kind of person. If it were Hestia stepping on his back, sure, he could accept a soft, cute girl. But there was no way he was messed up enough to calmly accept getting stomped on by a floor boss like this. And as his life force continued to drain, the most immediate effect was the decline of his bodily functions. If before activating the Godslayer's greatsword's rampage state, Ron was merely in a condition where his internal organs were injured, then now, as his life kept slipping away, he was like a dying old man on his last legs. Relying on the combat instincts honed through dungeon experience, he forcibly dragged his body into a roll toward the front side, barely dodging the fire giant's stomp. And the price was a body that felt like it was about to fall apart. Maybe you should just kill me already. Ron really wanted to give up. But he still forced himself back to his feet, once again swinging the Godslayer's greatsword in his hand. This time, he didn't continue attacking the areas already engulfed by black flame. Instead, he slashed at parts of the fire giant's body that hadn't been affected yet. With every swing, the black flame carried by the blade seemed to take root the moment it landed, clinging like a parasite that could not be removed, spreading at a visible speed, gradually engulfing both legs. As for the parts he couldn't reach, he raised his arm using the grappling hook of his shinobi prosthetic. He anchored it directly into the fire giant's body. Using the retraction force, he launched himself from the ground, chasing the floor boss while spreading black flame. Passing on the fire. Passing on black flame was that still fire. Until that black flame capable of burning even gods to nothing, leaving no chance of revival, visibly spread across nearly 30% of the fire giant's body. Ron's consciousness was already close to fading. With difficulty, he turned his head, looking toward Tiona in the distance. After receiving Ron's earlier instruction, Tiona had already stopped attacking the fire giant, worried that in full combat, she wouldn't be able to spare attention to support him. Of course, a large part of the reason was also how terrifying that black flame was. If she got touched by it, she didn't even dare imagine what would happen. But from the perspective of a bystander, she could see even more clearly Ron's rapidly deteriorating condition. His once striking black hair was now nothing but dry, pale white. Even his skin had become like that of an old man, lined with deep wrinkles as if he had completely burned himself out. It was hard to believe that he was the same age as Lafia. Especially when she saw that figure, now without grappling support, falling freely toward the ground. She didn't hesitate at all. Tiona moved decisively, catching Ron midair in her arms. Facing the boy's gradually unfocused eyes, her gaze turned complicated. "Is there anything else you want to say?" Looking at the black flames now covering nearly half of the fire giant's body, burning fiercely, Ron was actually quite satisfied with his handiwork. Just before his consciousness completely faded, he spoke with a tone full of emotion. "Tiona is my final ripple. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller